Thanks, Laurie.
You're welcome. I like good stuff.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate the introduction, the opportunity. Thank you, Phyllis. For those of you who don't know me, I see a lot of really unfamiliar names on here, which is a good thing. I am Brent Swander. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs with Columbus Realtors. And today we have what I deem to be an absolutely incredible panel that is going to help us just really navigate what they're seeing as quote unquote boots on the ground. I will do my best to keep my thoughts and opinions to myself while moderating the panel. I think that I say that so that you all know that we are actively engaged as Columbus Realtors in a lot of these conversations. One of the strengths that Central Ohio and the Central Ohio market has that many areas around the country don't have is an incredible building industry association. So we don't really meddle too much in the building. We do as partners, but there are associations and communities around the country that are not as fortunate and lucky to have the relationship between the two associations and the two organizations, or really even have a strong realtor organization or a strong builder organization. So we're tremendously blessed. So with that, John Melchi is the executive director of the BIA, who is joining us today. He was part of NIMBY to YIMBY Part 1. We also have Dave Efland from the Planning and Community Development Director of the City of Delaware. Dave has some pretty extensive experience. He's been there since 2005. He actually has his undergrad from Miami University in Urban and Regional Planning and a master's from The Ohio State University in City and Regional Planning. So tremendous experience. And as we know, building continues to go out and up and down. And so we're lucky to have Dave from the City of Delaware with us. And we also have Andrew Bowsher, the development director from the City of Reynoldsburg, with us today. Andrew has been there since 2018, I believe. Andrew grew up in Central Ohio here in Grove City. And Andrew also spent time as active duty serving tours overseas in the Middle East as an enlisted, right? Enlisted in the United States Army. So thank you for joining us, and certainly thank you for your service. If you have questions as we go throughout today, please put them in the chat. I will monitor the chat from time to time. But with that, let's get started. So John, I kind of want to turn it over to you first. I know in the first NIMBY to YIMBY Part 1, we really talked about the good and the bad. The good really is we face some unique problems. I think you highlighted some of these about a week and a half ago in the city of Marysville, that yeah, there are growth issues, housing issues all across America, but certainly not all across Ohio. So we do have a good problem to have, albeit a problem. Central Ohio has one of the strongest economies in the state, and year over year permits are up, but they're still below what we need to be building. The bad is the lack of inventory that we continue to discuss, increased cost in land acquisition, labor, material, et cetera, that we continue to struggle with here in Central Ohio. And the bad one that we continue to talk about is future lot availability. And with that comes the NIMBY part. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you. That's kind of a short recap, but I think you have some expanding thoughts upon that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brent. And thanks to the council for having me here this morning. It would not be a Zoom meeting without a PowerPoint. So I wouldn't want to deny you all that experience first thing in the morning. So I'm going to share my screen. If you'll bear with me for just a moment as I get this queued up. And as Brent mentioned, we have what I like to call first world problems here in Central Ohio. Sorry, it's taking a second to think here. We are very fortunate to have an area where we are growing. And let's see, sorry, It's taking a second here to get me into, there we are. Okay. We are very fortunate to be in a region that is growing. As I like to call us in the state of Ohio, we are the fastest slow kid. BIA did a study, and we're fortunate to have collaboration from Columbus Realtors on that study that showed that we need to be building about 14,000 units in the metro area for us to meet the demand that's out in the marketplace. And as Brent said, we did have a stronger year than last year. We built a 15-year high, but we were still 3,000 units short of what we needed to do. You folks know more than anybody the demand that's out in the marketplace, but let me just recap a few things for us real quick. This is the delta between new homes in blue and existing homes in orange. Existing single family homes are up 24% year over year. You guys knew that already, to $225,000 thereabout. Existing or new homes, $370,000. That price increase, while it's only 5 or 6%, really a strong driver in that price increase last year was material costs. Lumber costs are up almost more than double, and it is really causing challenges. So if you're a normal builder and your lumber package was normally $35,000, it's really pushing $75,000. We also know that for every $1,000 the price goes up in Central Ohio, just a little more than 1,000 potential home buyers are priced out of the market. So, you know, if lumber goes up, hypothetically, $35,000 on a house, 35,000 individuals in Central Ohio can no longer afford that house, even at the record low rates. So that's something to keep in mind. Existing home affordability. Only 64.3% of residents in Central Ohio can afford an existing home in our market right now. As you can see, the high was 73% in 2012. This is a problem. We need to be higher. 45% for new homes, and that's up a little bit. This number in a peer community of Raleigh, North Carolina is 65%. So, and just as a square footage basis, because you guys deal with this regularly, in Indianapolis, the average price per square foot on a new home is about $160, and in Central Ohio, it's up over $200. Most all of that is due to local regulation. So where are we in terms of permit data? As you can see, this is how we compare with our peer markets. And, you know, we are not competing with Toledo and Cleveland. We are competing with these other metro areas. And as you can see, the far left bar is Austin, Texas, where they permitted over 40,000 home units last year. Nashville was 25, Charlotte about 23, and Raleigh a little more than 16. So we did permit a little more than 11,000 units last year in the metro. However, if you look at the orange, what I'll call the University of Texas orange bar, you'll see that we built just over 5,000 single-family homes last year permitted. Indianapolis, which is a relatively good market for us to look at, did 7,500. So about 2,500 more single-family homes in the Indianapolis market. But for multifamily projects in our region, and specifically within Franklin County, these numbers would be a lot worse than they should be. So this should be a warning sign for everybody who says we're building all the time, we're building all the time. We are simply not. It's just not the case. First quarter alone this year, there were more than 1,000 housing units that have been rejected at local government levels throughout Licking, Delaware, Franklin, Union County, within the region. 1,000 units alone. Now, when you think that we were 3,000 units short of where we needed to be, these start adding up relatively quickly. And that 1,000 units was of a couple weeks ago. It might have gone up since then. It is a real challenge, and it happens on infill projects, and it happens in suburban and rural projects. The number one driver for our housing shortage is local opposition to development. It has been the case for some time. And Brent outlined some of the challenges we have just in general on the macro level, land acquisition costs, all of those challenges. The driver of local Nimby-Ism is still the number one hindrance to our development in Central Ohio. Why do they succeed? Because they show up. They show up to hearings. They show up on social media, and I'm really glad that Dave and Andrew are here because they can talk to you a little bit about how, as an industry and as community leaders within our communities, we can tackle and push back a little bit with facts, because a lot of what these folks say just isn't so. So here's two quotes that were in Columbus Business First last week. These come from the chairwoman of the Dublin Architecture Resources Board regarding a project that Dwight McCabe had brought up in Old Dublin. When you start seeing the Architectural Review Board citing things such as transient individuals and comments related to changes in demographics as reason to not favor projects, this is a perfect kind of microcosm of what a lot of the builders and developers go through on a regular basis. The difference is because we're in this Zoom era now, some of these things are getting recorded. I can tell you, talking to builders, they've heard a lot worse. And, you know, they cannot just run to the press and call it out because they're still trying to get a project done. And that's why it's incumbent upon us as associations to stick our nose in these things and to make it a little more, to not let folks get away with language like this when we're talking about projects. The basic 4 challenge points that they almost always use when opposing a project is: 1, they're going to flood the schools. 2, there's going to be so much traffic, we cannot possibly handle it. 3rd, the character of our community is going to be impacted negatively. And 4, the city can't afford to provide services to new residents. Here's your reality on schools. I want to draw your attention to that last one. Almost inevitably, when a multifamily unit goes up, we can't have that many kids in the school. Multifamily units, the numbers just don't bear that up. These are from the National Association for Home Builders. Obviously, there are outliers, but these are national numbers in aggregate, or numbers from the state of Ohio in aggregate. New construction brings less kids per unit in single-family new construction, and on large 20-plus unit multifamily structures, they're cash cow for school districts by and large because they generate significant property taxes without adding a lot of kids to the school district. And so this is something that when you see a project going up, folks will say, well, we can't have these kids. That's just not the case and has not been the case for some time. By the way, that doesn't mean our organization has pushed very hard for school funding to be fixed in the state of Ohio because we think it's a detriment to the growing Central Ohio region. It's been 20+ years. The fact they haven't been able to do it is quite frankly bordering on criminal to what they do to some of these school districts. Traffic, the reality, developers are a key component of fixing existing problems. In many cases, developers will go above and beyond what is required for a new development, but they cannot fix 30 years of a community not fixing their roads. And, in many of these cases, I ask these communities, how are you going to fix this road without the developer's contribution? I'm glad Andrew's here. He and I sat in on one a couple of years ago where the developer was offering to pay a significant portion of improvements within the city that would not have been possible and still haven't been possible, absent that contribution. Developers can be a part of the solution, but, they can't be the solution. And that's a challenge for folks. Finally, services. People don't think about the impact of construction across the board. And for every single family home built, 2.9 jobs in our marketplace are sustained for 1 year, and $130,000 in tax revenue is created both through income tax, sales tax, and other fees and assessments. 2.9 jobs. We're at a time where economic uncertainty and instability is really prevalent throughout our country. The residential construction industry is one thing that has been working effectively throughout the crisis. So when I see folks say, well, there's no jobs associated with these houses, that's not true. If you have any supply houses in your jurisdiction or municipality, if you have any plumbers, electricians, folks who are working on these jobs, you know, they're a part of this vibrant economy. Biggest thing we can do is stand up and speak out. Brent had this great number from the last time, which talked, I think, from a Boston University study that talked a little bit about how out of whack public hearings were in opposition to housing. Most communities, if you do a broad sampling, do not oppose developments in the same way that the people who show up at these meetings do. But the fact is, they do show up and they do speak out. And we need to be more active. I think realtors, in particular, because of the way you're respected in your communities, have a real good opportunity to be a huge part of the solution. As much as I'd love for us to say, as the building industry, we can go up and, you know, convince people otherwise, you know, there's always going to be, well, they're just a greedy developer. And of course, you know, John from the BIA is going to say that we need more housing because that's what he's paid to do. And yeah, I am paid to represent the builders, but that doesn't mean what we're talking about isn't the truth, and it is. So with that, I can.
John, I really appreciate it. Hopefully that gives us some context. You threw a lot out there that leads me to say we have a lot of content to cover in the next 40 minutes because there's so much there, right? Charlotte, I see your question regarding impact fees, and that's actually one of the topics that we're going to bring up. So at this point, I kind of want to turn it over to Andrew and Dave. And John threw out those who show up. And the challenges, let's just start what it is. The challenges even surrounding social media. I was taking a note, John, you said they show up. And I put a ... but not always with facts. So in context, I live in Dublin, and I am part of the Nextdoor platform. So whether it's Nextdoor, whether it's Facebook, whatever, there are new ways. And John, as former campaign operatives, we can talk about a grassroots advocacy campaign that really helps us. But quite frankly, we all know that there are half-truths or just blatant lies. How do you, Dave, and you, Andrew, really balance what's going on in today's social media world? Because as John said, people seem to either think they know or have facts before you as development directors have even had a chance to talk about the site, review the site. How do you, the question I will lead this into, how do you as development directors deal with social media platforms and the concerns surrounding those half-truths or mistruths and getting residents riled up, embedding or emboldening that NIMBY attitude?
So I think first and foremost, there has to be sort of an education process. And sometimes I guess that's really hard to hear, especially when you have facts and what is a perceived amount that's sort of out there. And we certainly get a lot of individuals that think that they're, you know, traffic engineers and that they know better than some of the experts that are out there. And so it's hard, but one of the steps is certainly having a Board of Zoning and Building Appeals and a planning commission that's filled with experts. So we fill ours with agents, architects, engineers, developers themselves, and part of all of that great team. And so when we can put out the facts, then those types of individuals cannot be swayed. We understand that pretty much every project, there's going to be somebody that comes out absolutely against it. And for us, it's about putting out the right rhetoric. I think the mayor and myself and our team here, we started a Wednesday show where we discuss development. We put it out there, out in the public, because what we have found is as soon as you start talking about apartments or townhomes, all of a sudden that turns into a Section 8 problem. And we are bringing, as John had mentioned, you know, transient or the others into the community. And now our property values are going to be decreasing when in all likelihood, the new development that's bringing in is only going to increase your property values. So it's having to sort of push that off to the side and understanding that it's coming in, and knowing that those are 1% of the population that's out there speaking against something, and those are typically the same actors that continue to come out against everything. So you answer their questions with facts, and you put out the correct information, and you continue moving forward, because it's not about the best for 10 individuals, it's the best for the community as a whole.
And Dave, I might even follow up on that real quick, is residential real estate and development becomes very emotional, right? And so even trying to talk to the facts can be challenging. So dealing with that emotion, and the follow-up I'm going to ask specifically is balancing the growth with maintaining the character of the city or the neighborhood. I know you are both in cities, but oftentimes we even hear, well, I moved here 30 years ago, and this is not what I wanted. And those are the challenges. So dealing with the emotion in those who have been there for a longer time. Dave, do you have any comments or thoughts around that?
Yeah, I really appreciate what Andrew described in terms of Reynoldsburg, and they're in a little bit of a different geographic situation than the city of Delaware relative to the core of downtown Columbus. And being an old geographer, geography matters, and it influences things anywhere you are. So everybody has their own kind of take on these questions of social media, and to your question that you just asked me, I think on the social media side, what I try to do is pretty simple but difficult. I try to stay off social media, and I try to ignore it, to be honest with you. I have a senior in high school, and I encourage him to do the same thing, because I think social media there's a lot of good it could do, but there's a lot of harm that it's doing to us overall in a lot of different areas as a society. We just haven't figured out an effective way to really deal with this medium. And I think there's some national discussions going on in that regard as well that are far above my pay grade. But we feel it in terms of, you'll have internet experts. I've been a planner for a long time, and I've never run into anyone who doesn't consider themselves an urban planner, especially when it comes down to a zoning hearing, let alone an engineer, or you guys probably hear everybody's a realtor. And that there's specific skill sets that we all bring to these problems. So sometimes we get drawn in as staff into these social media debates before they even become an idea of a developer or somebody. And everybody's got it all figured out in social media. To Andrew's point, it may be 30 people talking to each other and reinforcing their own message. And I think that happens. I guess I was thinking about this leading into today's discussion and I've thought about this for a while, as there's been a real shift in an opposition just to change that I've noticed in my career. Earlier in my career, I feel like there's always kind of been opposition to change, but I think it's certainly heightened more today. And I think some of the social media debates and the way we talk to each other, just in zoning hearings, our process is kind of set up as a dichotomy between, development or no development, density versus, I guess the opposite would be sparsity. Does anybody want that? Developer versus community, housing versus commercial. And as much as I'd like to think actual facts sway people, I guess the older I get, sometimes I don't think that we have to deal in the world of facts, and that's the world we deal in zoning and what it can and can't do. And there's a real misconception of what zoning and these hearing processes can and cannot do, or should and should not do. But I also think Columbus, I grew up in Clintonville, I grew up in Columbus. I've seen a lot of change in our community. I remember the short north when it was nothing really. and now look at it, let alone the Arena District and other things that are Reynoldsburg and Delaware seem like a long, long drive out here. And now it's a commute. So Columbus has seen a lot of change, but how do we handle that change collectively as a community? And how do we, to your question to me, long-winded answer, I'm sorry, this is what happens when you give me the floor, sir, but how do we maintain our character? Reynoldsburg's different than Delaware. That's okay. That's a good thing. There's strength in that diversity. And I think your clients as realtors, you show them the diversity in the places around Columbus, and that's good. It's not all one make place, but there are some commonalities in kind of the Columbus way that are things we can build on.
Perfect. And I think you talked a little bit about zoning development. So let's talk about comprehensive plans, and John, feel free to jump in here too, but updating, your comprehensive plans so that, Andrew, I think you mentioned this, there is a plan. We have on the development side seen where a developer actually meets all requirements of a comprehensive plan, and it either just gets outright denied or it's passed at the zoning commission. Citizens then pull a petition to take it to a ballot referendum, and that ballot referendum then wins, denying that zoning. So I guess that, again, like I said at the very beginning, there's a lot here to talk about. But let's talk about the importance of comprehensive plans. Andrew, I guess I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think, starting, for us, when I came on board in 2018, the city never had a master plan, had nothing, had no guiding vision. I like to coin the phrase that Reynoldsburg was sort of the sleepy big brother out east. Currently, when the new census comes out, we're going to be somewhere in ballpark of 40 to 45,000 residents. And so we're a big exurb or suburb. And I think for us is we had a lot of things that sort of sporadically happened without any guiding vision. And so we created a comprehensive plan in 2018. And the idea was that we needed to hone in on our commercial corridors. We needed to take a look at a lot of these housing efforts. And when I came on board, as John had mentioned, I even had called him and I said, hey, would you help me out? We're trying to get this 200 unit apartment complex and at the corner of Taylor and Main next to a Kroger's. It fits well within the scheme. And it was ultimately denied. And, that was not the first and certainly was not the last in that short period of time that we had to deal a lot with that. The city, following up with that, it had a zoning code that was written in the 1960s and really hadn't been updated since then, except knee-jerk reactions to actually only further hinder development to the point to where, we basically had outlawed all multifamily, and then single family homes, were very limited in that capacity as well. So we took the comprehensive plan, we took that future land use map, we re-looked at what the city needed to be. And then I'm thankful to say that MORPC, when we rolled it out, called it the most forward-thinking and progressive zoning code in the state. And the idea of it is we took 22 different zones and we took it down to 7 distinct districts. And within those districts, we outlined a variety of different areas to where we allowed the market to dictate said homes and commercial investment. And we understood that we had an aging housing stock. We had no new single family home development done within the last 20 years. We had no multifamily project done within the last 15. And, we were losing individuals and certainly not capturing new people to invest into Reynoldsburg and allow it to sort of thrive and grow. There's always this sort of mix of commercial to residential, and I'm sure we'll get further into that topic. But the idea being is that zoning code now allows for a plethora of different things to sort of happen that couldn't in the past. And the idea being is if you pre-zone all the parcels, you're not worried about utilizing PUDs and P&Ds and having to go through rezoning and having to allow it to go to city council. We basically remove all that. We give it to the subject matter experts, staff and myself, as well as the planning commissioners that are all brought on and appointed because they are subject matter experts. And we're going through one reading to get to something. So we have a brand new project from MI, 354 homes. They started an annexation process in January and they broke ground last year, all within the same time. 6 months of that is the annexation process, not done by us, but because of the state of Ohio. and the rules and regulations. We approved their entire development plan and final plat within 1 month. That's unheard of in the state of Ohio. And that is sort of the idea that we have to have speed to market, and we constantly have to continue building, because if you're not growing, you're dying. And that was exactly what Reynoldsburg was doing.
So
Brent, I would love to jump in on comprehensive planning, just because.
Go for
it. Our community has been engaged. We've had a great plan, a national award-winning plan since 2003, 2004. And then we've been doing what we would call working the plan, which is really the hard work of implementing a plan. Sometimes that's harder than actually creating the plan itself, many times. But it's served us well in kind of a traditional way, but a lot's happened in 15 or 20 years. Housing recession, a pandemic, a lot of growth and development, Central Ohio kind of coming of age and maybe ready to just explode here by looking at MORPS's discussions and numbers and analysis and the work that John is doing, just what we're experiencing. But for the last 3 years, we've been working on a plan for this community that's, we're 200 years old. We're a county seat municipality. We're about 30 miles from downtown Columbus. We have rich traditions and history that are important, as well as explosive growth really over that time period. But we called our plan, we started by having council appoint formally a 31-person steering committee, which is a lot of people to discuss these kinds of things with, but we carefully selected them along a number of parameters to represent the geography and the time in the city, and diversity and all that kind of stuff. And they have been, honestly, in my career, probably the best single committee I've ever worked with. They get in there, they roll up their sleeves, they get around maps, they've helped us with open houses and to bring the conversation to our citizens and the facts and listen to our citizens. And that's, having community-driven plans is important. It's what forms the foundation for the things that Andrew's talking about that he's done in Reynoldsburg as well. So that's important. We have to do this together and not kind of to each other. I think that if we do things to each other, we're facilitating that dichotomy between us and them. And we have to work together. That's the only real path, knowing that we're not Pollyanna, not everybody's going to get on board, but we call our plan Delaware Together. And that's what our steering committee decided on, just the title of the plan, let alone what we say in it. We're getting close to updating that plan, and it really presents some paradigm shifts for our community, reflecting focused areas and embracing of more mixture of uses, embracing new development areas that are focused, but also a focus on some infill areas, including our national award-winning downtown, which is very, very important to our community and our economy. But that will set the stage, we hope, if council approves that and the community approves it in the coming months, that will set the stage to hopefully do the hard work of implementing it and updating our zoning code, which, like Andrew, most zoning codes start off pretty well, and then there are a series of reactions to things people don't like, and they build up over time, and then it becomes a very thick kind of unwieldy monster that you have to implement every day.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And so, John, I'm going to lean to you here quickly because I know we still have a ton of content to get through. So when we're looking at, other than Delaware and Reynoldsburg, you and I are aware of many townships specifically. Obviously, township trustees are made of 3 trustees. Right now, we know there's a lot of 2-to-1 votes. It may or may not pass zoning commission, and it may or may not then pass the township trustees 2-to-1. I think from a pure political aspect, we talk about the Nimby-Ism, those who actually show up at these meetings. I'm asking a long question, but hopefully a short answer. How can we, as associations, as builder reps on these calls, as as realtors, as title and lenders who are pro responsible development, what challenges are there when, quite frankly, these township trustees might go 2-to-1 anti? Andrew talks about putting subject matter experts on the zoning commission, and so that they can, I would say, expedite or green tape, if you will. And Dave's talking about a 31 panel committee. What challenges are you seeing from the building community, and how do we overcome some of that? And what happens when they are just, you talked about 1,000 units being just outright denied. That is the fear that I have, and the Nimby-Ism that I think we're even talking about.
Yeah, I think one of the association that is important for us is, I alluded to this earlier, our builders and developers are busy focusing on the project that they need to get across the finish line, and they don't have a lot of time to work on processes. So I think for our respective organizations, trying to be seen as an educational and informational resource is one of the first things that we can do. And to try to have as many conversations with folks as you can. Now, you might not always be able to change their minds, but I think we have to make every good faith effort to do so. And there's a lot of folks out there who just don't understand. And I'll give you a City of Columbus example. Councilmember Favor, relatively new member, and was learning a lot about housing. She obviously had experience on from her time at the city attorney on evictions and rental issues, but was unaware of the underbuilding of the marketplace. And we went over our study with her and sat down and had a really good conversation. And she's brought that back to me multiple times and has talked about it in interviews. So we need to be out there educating. Nobody's going to be more respected than those of you that live in certain communities. And, maybe not just showing up at a meeting, but scheduling some time outside of offices or outside of a hearing to talk about the needs in the marketplace. And then Andrew, Dave, cover your ears. We have a political action committee at the BIA, and the realtors have a strong one. And I think now more than ever, we need to support candidates who will at least give folks a fair opportunity to bring forward projects. And it's really important right now. And, I think that's one of the things, it's a 2-to-1 vote. I mean, and ultimately you've got to count to a majority. And, people are on the ballot, and we need to support folks who support our industry, because ultimately, if you put a bunch of NIMBY folks on there, they're denying all of us an opportunity to make a living.
Mm-hmm. So, again, a lot of follow-ups, but I'm going to ask Andrew and Dave specifically, quickly, with 15 minutes here left. What do our developers need to be doing? I know that they're actively engaged, right? But just for our audience and for their purposes, what do zoning commissions, city councils, what do they want to hear when they first approach that zoning or maybe even a rezoning process? And then what does council want to hear? What do the residents want to hear? Because that's where the challenges lie, whether it's BZA and architectural review getting into the words of transient guests and demographics. What do your folks want to hear? What do you want to hear from developers? What do residents also need to hear or want to hear?
Brent, sometimes I think they just want to hear that the project's going to go away, to be honest with you. And that's just not the reality of it. But I think what they want to hear are the facts, and I think they can be swayed by the facts. I think this group's interesting, and I was thinking to myself, what can a group of realtors do to join the conversation? Well, I might have a realtor sitting with a developer at a zoning hearing, but I don't have a number of even our local realtors show up to that hearing. It may not be their developer to help support what that developer is doing and explain that your clients who are looking for homes and business opportunities want what the developer is proposing to do. So I think those kinds of things could help. To your earlier point, maybe at the beginning of this discussion, that could help balance a hearing process, which is kind of tilted to people coming in and being in opposition, as opposed to listening to people that might be for it.
So Dave, can I follow up quickly before I turn that over to Andrew? I think John has a great quote that he typically has and says, homes are where jobs go at night. So if our members and our realtors can show up at some of these meetings and basically say, I have a reload client, or I have a client who wants to be in your neighborhood or in your community, but they literally don't have anywhere to go. And making that even an economic development message that could be impactful. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. And John knows this. I think the BIA, I really respect what they do and the business and the jobs they create and the studies they've done. But some people feel as if those studies are done from their perspective. And
people over
John,
profits. Or profits over people, right?
Yeah, John knows this. The source of the information matters. But I think the thing with realtors is that you're all kind of hyper local. You're in the communities, you're in the restaurants, you know people. It's a very personal relationship that you develop with your clients. And so that can be helpful. And we talked earlier, these are often emotional hearings on what should be substantive fact-based topics. But what is the storytelling that can happen from different groups with facts, but what is the basic storytelling that can happen that can help move that emotional needle? I think that's kind of what we miss. And Andrew and I's job is not to necessarily tell a story or be emotional. Our jobs are really to be fact-based and unemotional.
Yep. Andrew, you want to follow up on that quickly? Thank you, Dave. I think that's all very good information.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Dave. Certainly, no one's showing up to a meeting to pat it on its back. They're only there to try to shoot it down. And so that's always a challenge. I think another thing too for us, because we did all these zoning changes and because they're not having to be dredged through a bunch of hearings, and it's not necessarily ramming it down anyone's throat or anything to that ladder. I think for us too, we take a very proactive approach with our developers. So Josh Barkin from MI, Joe Simonello, all huge projects that are going on right now for the city. And for us, it's working with them months ahead of time. We're getting to going through everything. We're sort of in the Army, we would call that red teaming it. And that's taking a look and saying, well, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this project? What are the threats that potentially could come up? And how can we counteract that? And it's really just being a proactive sort of government wanting to say, hey, we're open for business. We are doing everything in our power. Obviously, we want great product. We want new residents here. Can't have new businesses if you don't have new employees. And for us, we've got to continue to build. And so we've created sort of those relationships that have really sort of helped out. Last year, we had, thank you, John, for sharing those numbers that put a lot of things in perspective. Central Ohio as a whole is roughly about 2 million people. And if we've only approved 10,000 homes, that means that city of Reynoldsburg is 2% of the entire population, except we approved over 10% of all of those homes that came out there. So we're certainly doing our job. We think we'll probably do maybe double, maybe triple that this year. So we're happy to continue creating that boom. And obviously, if you guys didn't see last year, Realtor.com named Reynoldsburg the second hottest real estate in the market. And that's not Columbus, that's Reynoldsburg as specific. Only second to Colorado Springs, so pretty good company to have.
Yeah, so I think Central Ohio, to your point, Andrew and Dave, we're talking about the highlights of each community winning awards, and we do really have a lot to be proud of from everywhere. I do want to get to a couple other quick questions. I know we have some questions in the chat. I want to keep everyone on schedule here. Let's talk about a few dirty words, bad words, density, developers, landlords. It really just seems as if landlords and developers are public enemy number one and 1A. You can switch the order as you see fit. I would also throw into the word density is a bad word. How do we as builder reps, realtors, advocates, community advocates, we have a couple suggestions here in the chat that I'm going to get to. How do we change these mindsets to stop talking about density developers as bad words? And I'll throw in, one of the things I've challenged, we've challenged the affordable housing group with is really talking about housing affordability. Affordable housing has a negative stereotype. And so it's just changing these words and that can help change mentality. So thoughts surrounding that?
I think probably the biggest thing is, I know David, he mentioned that he doesn't use density, he uses intensity. And I think that's a great sort of play. I think that people will eventually pick up on some of those phrases. The problem with the word density, because it's so negative, is anybody can throw a number out there and say, oh my gosh, that is too dense and I don't want it there. And we could be talking about, 5 units to the acre, which is your typical suburban, type of development. But
Andrew, I'll give you an example. Up here in the next door app here in Dublin, there are community members who are advocating that every lot needs to be a minimum. And I'm not kidding. You can look it up. Social media, 5 acre units, 5 acres or 5 acres. It's crazy.
Yeah. I don't think we're building farms anymore, and I think that's exactly what that would be. And so that's a problem. It's an unperceived notion, or just the lack of education that's based on there. So what we did, actually, we threw out density mins and maxes because, to be truthful, all they are is a pie in the sky number that confuses individuals, and they don't really understand what that means. So typical multifamily development is anywhere between 12 to 24 units to the acre. And for us, is we just took a look at mins and max as far as setbacks are concerned. We understand that this is a market-driven place. The developers know what the product that they're building. We know what it is out there. So we're not trying to stop individuals from coming in and bringing in their product. We are just trying to make sure that we loosen the string. So we've opened up the playbook. So for example, I guess for us, we knew that those words were dirty and we needed to take them out of the context. So most of you guys are probably familiar with like R1, R2, R3. Well, all through R1 through R20 for us, what we did was we smacked and put them together. And we said, okay, we're going to allow the developer to come in. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to have some parameters that's there. We're going to want a really good product. But at the end of the day, they know what is going to sell. They know what is going to be successful within those areas. We know what we're looking for. Let's allow for that to be able to happen, understanding that typical lots nowadays for single family homes are anywhere between 40 to 70 foot lot widths. So let's make that the min and max if that's the desired outcome. And then let's not worry about density. Let's not put numbers out there that are going to make people upset or cling to and say, well, we got to deny it because it's that sort of density. So we just got to really, we got to get rid of the way that we used to do things in the past. And we really have to adapt to how we're building things into the future.
Yeah, I like Brent, intensity versus density, design over everything, compatibility over everything. What's interesting is if I tell a group of people outside a zoning hearing, where do you go spend a vacation? Disneyland, New York, Chicago, Paris. These are some of the most dense places on earth. And you go spend your vacation time there. Your free time and your free money. But when you come back home, for some reason you don't want any of that. And I think you have to, of course, all these hearings are hyper local. And that's what the discussion today is, in a backyard versus not a backyard. And that's what makes them difficult. We could talk, part of the discussion for us is it'd be very interesting to lay out the Columbus population at a 5 acre minimum on a map and show people visually how far you will be extending roads and infrastructure and how much that would cost everybody to do that. It's unsustainable fiscally, completely unsustainable. And we've taken that on in our plan a little bit as some of that fact-based analysis. But if I said partnership, shared outcomes, logical transitions, great recreational opportunities, wonderful open spaces, connected neighborhoods, completed bike paths, close schools, easy commutes, safe places, good schools, who would object to that? But when it's sitting next to your neighborhood, then all of a sudden everybody objects to that. So that's the gulf we have to bridge.
So that actually leads me to one of my my last 2 bullet points that I wanted to ask you both about before we get to some of these questions are the importance of green space and parks and connectivity of bike trails, because that seems to be a go-to, right? We need more parks, we need more green space. Is that, in your opinion, and I think we can agree that they're important, is it really a gaslighting the issue or a window dressing of the issue? or are they valid concerns? Is it something we need to be thinking more about? And then you hit on, Dave, you just hit on a couple of our schools and infrastructure, transportation as well. So we don't have time to answer all of those. So I guess I'll just, the talk of green space and parks. What are your opinions on those, and how do we make sure we're giving people what they want while protecting green space?
I think they're very important. Our citizens tell us they're important. Housing value, I think from what I see, tells us they're important. And I don't know a developer that doesn't want to include those. It's kind of how we do it, in the devil's in the design details, and making sure that those linear open spaces and bike paths are connected. That helps build that, weave that fabric of community together.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, most developers want that green space because they want their residents to be able to have sort of that area. Addition, us connecting it to the city park system is really important for us as well. But I also think, to your point, Brent, there is that seems to be a one of those reasons to sort of shoot down something. It's but the city should buy that. Well, if the city is going to buy every parcel in the land, we will be bankrupt within a year every time that they ask us to go and buy something and not have it developed. The other funny thing that I find humorous is also to say, well, that's a cornfield, the city should be doing something with it. Well, it's an inactive space, it's private property, you're not doing anything with it. But if we're allowing for some development to happen, now there's going to be a passive or an active green space that's going to be there, that is going to be community based for everyone. And typically a lot of the developers nowadays, they're looking for connections. I know, for example, that out in Plain City, they're actually, MI is looking, they're partnering with a metro park. They're going to get a brand new metro park out of some land that basically is in a floodplain. And I think the developers understand that now, maybe more than they did in the past, and understanding that you have bright, administrators that are out there and city planners, and we're all sort of working together, but you don't get those things unless you're developing. So you got to continue to build. And then now you can actually have those active green spaces, which is a community amenity for everyone.
Totally get it. And I think that makes sense. One of the areas I skipped over in my notes, and Charlotte actually asked us, the very first question is when we were talking about what do zoning commission, city councils want to hear regarding development. Quick answer here. We have 2 minutes left, and we might go a few minutes over, but what percentage of new development infrastructure should be paid by the developer through impact fees? No one wants to take a stab at it?
Well, Brett, I'll take a stab. The city of Delaware's had impact fees here for quite some time. We've had explosive dynamic growth in our community. And so from my perspective, the impact fees aren't holding back any kind of development. And in fact, they help us balance that fiscal sustainability piece I talked about earlier, and have allowed us to put in new fire stations that serve more than just one particular development. They serve an area typically, accommodate new police cruisers to keep our community safe, in parks and open space at a community scale. And so those are important. I'm not sure there's a magic percentage number I would be willing to throw out there. I will say that impact fee studies for us, and from what my knowledge is around the country, they're based on an extensive study in that local community relative to costs and service provisions. But certainly you could get, if it's 10, 20% of a home's value, that seems like a lot for that particular parameter. But as we've talked about with John of the BIA, I mean, every bit adds up for them. There's a pro forma with a number of costs at the bottom line for them. For us, it's a little bit here, a little bit there, and trying to make sure we have our service provisions together. So I think impact fees could be a good, in Ohio, opportunity to maintain fiscal sustainability for localities, but there's a balance to be struck there.
Brent,
Go ahead, John.
Real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, John.
No. I think we have communities where they're in place, and there's communities where they're looking to put them in place, and there's communities where they've used other mechanisms to help with government sustainability. Our concern comes from when a local government says, we've got a hole in our budget. How are we going to fill it? Let's tack on some impact fees. Let's tack on some other similar numbers. And, I'll give you an example. There's a community that rhymes with Pataskala that's looking at impact fees. And, you hear from them, they're like, are these coming out? Are these coming out? And they said, well, the numbers weren't exactly what we thought. We're going to study it a little more. And I'm like, are you trying to hit a number? Because that's not what this is for. And when you take impact fees and you take tap fees for water and sewer.
Excessive tap fees that we in some communities.
Yeah, you start adding those up, it becomes a big number real quick. And for instance, in Johnstown, they just increased their fees to tap 30-something%. So now you're at, the developer and builder had already penciled out the numbers for that project. You just changed the math on their profitability on that development pretty significantly. So it does play a big role, and the costs ultimately are paid by the consumer.
Yep. Andrew, any final thoughts on that issue?
No, I think just that John nailed it. I think for us, we don't have impact fees here in the city, and it's come up a time or two in some discussions and things like that. And so I think the biggest thing for us is the worrisome about the affordability factor. As John laid out earlier, construction costs are high. Things are becoming less and less affordable. And the more that we do not build and we get further and further behind, that's only going to increase. And so adding additional things that are on top of that ultimately go onto that consumer, I think, create that gap even further. If I'm a first-time home buyer and I want to buy a home, I don't want to get to that point where now I feel like I'm stretched and I can't do that. And I think that'll be a problem. So there's a fine line, there's a balance, and there's some great incentives that are out there, like tax increment financing that our city uses really great, that I think even some cities don't even utilize to its fullest extent. Or you have places, maybe that rhyme with Hilliard that's completely against it. And, the idea is we've got to open up the whole tool set to take a look at those.
Yeah, this conversation could literally go on forever. As John talked about, Andrew and Dave cover your ears. We had a candidate interview as part of our PAC process 2 years ago, and a candidate running for a suburban city council is literally pounding his fist on the table and saying, if I'm elected to city council, I will never vote for another apartment complex as long as I'm a member of council. And those are just kind of the mentalities and we had to have, quite frankly, an educational session during our PAC interview. These are the mentalities that we're dealing with. So the last question, John, I'm gonna throw out to you, and then I'm gonna turn to Dave and Andrew and wrap it up here quickly. Does NIMBY-Ism raise costs of homes and of development? I think we all know the answer, but do you want to highlight that quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say yes, without a doubt, for a variety of reasons. One, oftentimes because of tactics employed by folks opposing projects, the development process gets elongated. The longer the process takes, the more cost it brings. And I'll give you an example. One of our developers had a project in a suburban neighborhood and took about 2+ years, and they ended up losing. Spent about $250,000 on the project to lose. That $250,000, that doesn't just get written off. That gets rolled into the next project. And that means that the builders, the next project that builder and developer does has to try to make up that money that they lost on $250,000. So one community's opposition to development projects has an impact across the region. So if that developer brought a project to Delaware or to Reynoldsburg, they're going to have to try to make up that $250,000 that they lost in another region. So without a question, it does. And, it has impacts on environmental impact. We talked about that briefly too. If your goal is to prevent sprawl and to maximize land usage, density is a way to do that and increase walkability, increase livability, and protect green space. So it has an environmental cost, because as these 5-acre lots that Brent talked about keep getting pushed out, you end up eating more and more land for the people that are coming. They are coming. We can't stop that, hopefully.
Yep. John, quickly, there's a couple suggestions in here that maybe you and I can work on. Can BRAC, either the BRAC, Filter Realtor Alliance Committee, and even Government Affairs and us, BIA, send out notifications when and where zoning hearings might be taking place so that we could have folks show up if needed?
Yeah, I'm sure we could do that. And I would also urge all of you in your local jurisdiction, sign up to be on the mailing list for your local community. They'll mail those out to you pretty regularly. And that's a really good way to keep an idea of what's going on in your local markets.
Totally agree. Andrew, Dave, any other, Melody put in here too, New Jersey passed 1 unit per acre in Cranberry. So I assume that's Cranberry, New Jersey, and literally stopped all development. Those are suggestions here in the Dublin area, Plain City, Jerome Township. So hopefully we don't get to that point. But Andrew, Dave, final thoughts, and we'll wrap it up here with John.
I'd just say thank you for the invitation and the discussion. I'd love to hear what some of your members are thinking about. The only other thing I would suggest, and I've been on this saw for my entire career in the great state of Ohio. The great state of Ohio seems to undervalue its cities, in particular, its municipalities. It's taken away many, many tools for cities to grow and develop in smart ways. And in fact, it's even behind in planning, enabling legislation to all of our surrounding states who have updated theirs. Ohio has not done that in large part since it was passed 100 years ago. These are things that your group as an action committee can help potentially move the needle on the state legislature and return some of this good, reasonable, smart growth and sensible approach to our growth and development in this state.
Thank you so much, Dave. Andrew?
Yeah, well, no, I just wanted to say thank you for being able to be here today and speak to everybody. It's certainly a passion of mine to see sort of development and growth happen. And, I've lived here practically my whole life off and on, and certainly a Buckeye through and through. And I think we've got a lot of great things that are in the works and a lot of great momentum as we sort of go through. And I think there's just some challenges that we're going to have to get through or hurdle over. And I think we're a really great playbook for that. And I ask anybody that's on the call that wants any more information of what we discussed today, feel free to reach out. I have an open door policy, and more than happy to talk shop in Reynoldsburg and at least talk your ear off.
And Todd, I see your comment here, the suburbs are the country of the last generation. I think that's what we're really trying to struggle with. That's what we struggle with, right? Is maintaining the character in that feel. And it's something everybody struggles in trying to balance. It's really, really tough. I give the example, this isn't about me, but I grew up in Van Wert, and where the 500 acres where I grew up is now completely surrounded by wind farms. And it's different struggles in different areas, and it's tough, right? So John, I'll leave it to you.
Oh, first off, I want to thank Marquet and the committee for doing all the work to put this together. We are fortunate here. We are in a growing region. I, as a kid, lived in Springfield, Ohio. They got their first new development in 20 plus years there recently. And I think in terms of building and development, the fact that people want to be your neighbor and want to move to your community should be embraced. And I think, I highlighted a lot of the challenges that we have. We as an industry need to talk about the benefits, that we live in communities where people want to go, that they want their kids to go to our schools, that they want to work in your communities, and we can embrace that and champion those folks. It's a good challenge to have. I don't understand the folks who want to, reflexively oppose everything. Is their obituary going to read opposed residential development? Is that something they want on at the end of the day, to be their legacy? we have an opportunity as an industry to help this region reach its potential, and it won't happen without the work of our local elected or our local government officials like David and Andrew, and without our industry. So, and I'll add the comment about the suburbs being the country of yesterday. I talked with Bell Fountain some time ago, and they said, why would we worry about residential development now? And I told them, because the folks in Marysville said the same thing 12 years ago. And the market is expanding, and that's going to continue to happen. And that is a good thing.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap it up here quickly. Thank you, John. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Dave. I was watching the Today Show this morning, and they were talking about just housing in general and what to look for as a home buyer 101. Somebody mentioned the first-time home buyers here, right? There were multiple folks who cash is king. We are seeing appraisals waived. We're seeing inspections waived. You know, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 over list. We aren't going to build our way out of this problem. One of the things that I have talked to our Government Affairs Forum Chair, Carrie Eigel, and Vice Chair Tony Macaluso about is some of the comments surrounding why are there no homes available for $150,000 or $200,000. Couple of conversations John Melchi and I have had is really talking about the cost of development for a developer, before ground is even ever broken. And just really trying to put some study behind it, right? First-time home buyers in this market are going to struggle. And you all know that better than I do, especially if you don't have the cash or you're unwilling to waive appraisal or inspection. So we're not going to build our way out of it, but Nimby-Ism attitude, along with a ton of other reasons, not just that, is what continues to burden in Central Ohio. We're not building quickly enough, we're not building quickly enough. Make sure my grammar's correct there. But we have to continue to work through it. And we're grateful for people like Dave and Andrew who get it. Getting it is the first step, right? And understanding it. So I will leave it there. John, Andrew, Dave, thank you. Marquet, thank you for the opportunity. Laurie and Phyllis, thank you. And hopefully these conversations continue and conversations move past conversations and into action.